Right.
Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Regina Brown Wilson, the Executive Director of California Black Media, a nonprofit serving African-American owned media outlets throughout the state of California. And tonight we're here with a coalition of Black Excellence, the Voters Series. And for our special guest tonight, we have Sebastian Ridley-Thomas, the Honorable Sebastian Ridley-Thomas, AKA SRT, who served in a state assembly representing the District 54 in South Los Angeles. And he is also the executive director, tell me if I have that right, of the Civic Engagement and Black Voter Engagement Project. Tonight, we are going to talk census, and I get to have the honor of asking Sebastian some great questions. So, Sebastian, tell us, what's the deadline for the census?
Well, thank you, Regina. It's very good to be with you and the coalition, inspirational folks that are doing great things all around. The deadline for the census was extended to September the 30th, and the state of California is working very diligently, primarily by county, to make sure that we get a good count.
Great. So for our folks that may not know what the census is, why don't you tell us a little bit what does it mean?
So constitutionally in the United States, every 10 years, we count to see where everybody is, primarily because that's how money is distributed, the tax money, for healthcare, welfare, economic development, transportation, any number of things. They're all based on the census. Additionally, when we have districts in cities, states, and in the U.S. House of Representatives, they are apportioned or granted by virtue of where people live. And that is very key to political representation and engagement in the civic process. And the tenet of one man, one vote.
Great. So, how does this make a difference? What happens if we're undercounted? What happens if folks just say, hey, I see this information, I'm not going to fill it out, or just so busy, so consumed with the pandemic and all the things that are going on? How does it make a difference? What difference does this make in someone's life?
So per household, everybody that doesn't fill out the census misses out on tens of thousands of dollars a year. And in the aggregate, it can get to billions. For Black California, the roughly 2 million people of African descent who live in California, it can be life or death. It can be the difference between securing a greater access to healthcare or skilled nursing facilities or COVID response or making sure that as law enforcement is reimagining, we make more investments in prevention and intervention rather than suppression, that we get cut out just because we didn't fill out the census. So it's critical. It has real impact today, tomorrow, and you only do it once every 10 years. So what we do by the end of this month will have great impact for the next decade.
So I know I read an interesting fact, just doing my own research about the census. And what was so interesting is that historically, African-American males, actually since the World War II, have been historically undercounted. What do you think we could do to get our numbers up in this short period of time that we have left? What do you think we can do to get our numbers up?
If Black Lives Matter, we have to make sure that they count. We have to make sure that our brothers are filling out the census. It's much easier. And the federal government and state government and all these counties in California are pushing a digital completion of the census. You can also get on the phone and call the census. So they're trying to make it more accessible. The thing that has always been difficult is in the harder to reach and harder to count communities. Those are terms of art, where we really have to go and knock on folks' doors. Right now, generally speaking, we're not seeing a lot of that. Thank goodness some folks are trying, but it's kind of tedious with the concerns about COVID and what we see in Europe, for example, where the economy is a bit more open and COVID cases going back up. We don't want a repeat of that here in California and across the United States. So African-American men must be engaged, must be reminded over the next couple of weeks, because this is it. It's all on the line. If we want to change structural racism, we got to fill out the census, because we got to have the numbers to make the arguments. The numbers tell us that only 5% of Black households in the nation make over $200,000 in income, and that's the whole household. The numbers tell us that the average African-American family or average net worth of African-Americans in the United States is only $10,000 versus the $105,000 for white families, the $120,000 for Asian families, and the $13,000 for Latino families. Those are all based on the data, and we want to get as accurate information as we can in order to make the argument. So if we want reparations, if we want access to higher education, if we want to get our fair share of education funding, that is from early ed to high school, before you get to community college, vocational ed, and beyond, we must fill out the census. Black men care about their families, they care about communities, their fathers, their surrogate parents to their younger siblings, their nephews and nieces, and they must be made aware. Just like we're talking about Black men and being healthy, in particularly in light of Chad Boseman's untimely demise, and making sure that we check our health, we need to check our civic health. That's what the census is about.
So as we talk about, that was a good way to kind of pivot maybe to this, question around what does this voter like suppression look like? And I say that because we know that the census is connected to voting. Obviously, when we talk about redrawing lines and understanding where representation is put, and knowing that our faces are not usually in the room whenever these lines are being drawn. What do you think that looks like, and how does the census, how do those census numbers impact that? What do you think about how and what we will be able to do to be able to ensure that we, figure out how to marry those things together, this education, so that people understand how this stuff works?
So there's a two-part answer to that question. One is in the absolute immediate, like in the next 40 days. The other is in the immediate future, over the next year and a half. So for the next 40 some days, we are seeing census engagement that will then turn into voter engagement with respect to ballots arriving in California to all households the first week of October. Every registered voter in California for the first time in history is going to receive a ballot that they can mail in, and they don't even have to put a stamp on it once they fill it out. They simply need to fill it out, put it on their mailbox. The postman will come and pick it up and put it in the ballot. That starts the first week of October. Most households will have their ballots by October the 5th. It will be on in their mailbox. So there's a continuum of civic engagement. If we want to make our voices heard, we got to take those marches and protests in light of Brother George Floyd's assassination, and we got to meet it at the ballot box. And I have to tell you, for the sake of the Coalition of Black Excellence, is that this group, the 4,000 plus members in the San Francisco Bay region, are going to make a difference on ballot measures, on elections that are going to have material impact for the future. That's how the census connects in the immediate. The other thing is that it gives an accurate count, because people say, well, where are all the Black communities in California? Most of the people who are going to be watching this have not lived in California that long. They weren't here for the 2000 census, the 2010 census. The 2010 census also did not have as aggressive an outreach as we're attempting to have now. So we're resting around, I think, a 60-some, low 60, mid 60% response rate in Black communities. We need to get up to 90% in the next 2 weeks, and that will build for our immediate future of influence elections and finding success. For the immediate future, over the next year and a half, the census triggers a process called redistricting and reapportionment, which means is all the data that's collected is then measured and analyzed, and U.S. House of Representative seats, there are 53 in California. There are 3 African Americans that serve in those House seats. Do you
want to tell us who those are? I mean,
the 3 African Americans that serve in the House are Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Representative Karen Bass, Democratic Steering Committee co-chair Barbara Lee of Oakland, and Representative House Financial Services Chair Representative Waters from Southern California.
So should I say AKA Auntie Maxine?
You may call her that.
Okay.
She's been known.
I figure our millennials will know her by that.
They may know her. And their districts are going to be, the districts that they currently represent are going to be adjusted via the redistricting process based on the census. That's the subtext. And there's going to be a public input process, and we're going to ask the Coalition of Black Excellence to opine on that, because the African Americans in the Greater Bay Area need to have their voices heard in that process. So this is a continuum. I believe it was the philosopher Idris Ajmadan, you may know him as Nipsey Hussle, who said the marathon continues. And that's what civic engagement is like. And people who fight for their rights get a seat, and a seat of prominence at the table. With respect to voter suppression, they fight so hard against us, institutions, powers, and principalities, because they know the power. Those who would dominate the political system, who would dominate Black futures without Black input, understand that if you fill out the census, if you register to vote, if you pay attention to the civic activities of the places where you live, work, and play, it is likely that you will get engaged and you will get busy in Black liberation. It's easy to become an abolitionist when you have information. And that's how voter suppression comes in, to try to have people confused or not as educated or not as able to access any amount of information about elections. That's why this voter education series, your participation, the organizations that I work with engaging are so critical, as well as many of our partners, because there are things on the statewide ballot in terms of propositions, and there are elections of consequence all over the Golden State that will materially impact Black politics in 2020 and in 2022. And I would say that African Americans in California are culture creators. You know, some people are called culture vultures. We don't have that challenge. We are creators. We are incubators. So goes California's African American community, so goes the nation. If we have a high turnout, it's likely we can have a more representative democracy in our federal houses of power. I'll let you figure out what I'm saying. If we have a lower turnout, I suspect that our cousins, friends, and neighbors in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, and Milwaukee may have a harder time getting up and getting busy for democracy. So that's why you see voter suppression, is because a threat to one is a threat to all. The confusion in California may get somebody to say, well, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, I don't vote. You are surprised at how your behavior, others' behaviors, and your intentionality, you're talking about it, you're sharing. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be that you tell somebody who to vote for. I would argue you should do that if you know and you have conviction. That is, at least offer your opinion. But really, it's about sharing the process of voting, making voting a habit, because it raises your civic IQ and lets you get into what the late Representative John Lewis might call good trouble.
Well, great. So I think that's so much information to unpack, and I thank you for sharing this with us this evening and with this audience. So where would people get information? If there's somebody, your cousin Craig, whoever, who might not say, hey, I'm not filling that out, I don't want the government to have my information, where should they go to say, look, I'm gonna fill the census out for you?
Okay, so the first thing is, for census, we need to get to census.ca.gov, census.ca.gov. For any other additional questions about census, voting, any questions, you have concerns, you can reach out to the organization that I lead, the California Policy and Research Initiative. That's calpri.org or calpri on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. CalPRI, Policy Research Initiative.org, or CalPRI, CALPRI at any of the those 3 social media channels. And we will continue to keep individuals updated on best practices, on what you need to know. And if you're concerned or need some advice, we're happy to provide resources. And we thank CBE for inviting us, because we want to come back with 2 more series, and we're going to call it the Black Ballot, a little preview, a little teaser, where we break down in 2 sessions the statewide ballot measures. And lastly, before I shut up, I'll tell you, Regina, that I have to thank you, because without your leadership as a census commissioner, a California Complete Counts Commission member, we would not have a seat at the table. We would be on the menu, but certainly not at the decision-making table. So thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for your energy. And thank you for your sacrifice to make sure Black California gets its fair share.
Well, thank you so much. We also did a report at California, or cablackmedia.org, called Counting Black California, where we had researchers look at the data to try to help determine some of those hardest to count census tracts, so that the state would focus its dollars and reach those communities that may get overlooked. Because, as Sebastian, as you know, many times people can look at data and skip over us because they feel like we're scattered. So I'm just happy to know that your leadership, always continuing to keep our communities in the forefront, and always making sure that the data is looked at in that particular light. I definitely appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk and help educate us all about why the census is important this evening.
It's my pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.